moderating tonight. Have you been here all day? Yes. All right. Before I bring Chris out, I just want to ask you one thing. Is there anybody here who hasn't seen these movies before? Well, I don't have to tell you who I'm about to introduce, so let me just bring him up. Christopher Nolan.
Since I was a kid, I first came to the character, like a lot of people my age, through reruns of the TV series. Yeah. And watching a TV show as a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, I wasn't really particularly aware of the camp or the irony, inherent in it. And I think the elemental nature of the character, the kind of primal thing that's there in Batman, speaks through that interpretation, just as it speaks hopefully through our interpretation.
Yeah, it's extraordinary, all the iterations it's gone through. I'm wondering, though, at what point did you really seriously think you were going to get into this? And how difficult is it when you're jumping into something that's been around for years and years and years, and you want to make it new?
Well, the exciting thing for us approaching Batman Begins is we had heard that Warner Brothers wanted to do something new with the character, but didn't have a specific idea about what they wanted to do. And obviously for a filmmaker, that's an incredibly exciting opportunity. The first thing myself and David Goyer and my other collaborators did is we got on a plane and we went to DC in New York and sat down with Paul Levitz, the then head of DC, and talked about what are the fundamentals of the character, like what are the things that we really have to be true to. We wanted that kind of sign off, if you like. And Paul's point of view was Batman, more so than some of the other characters in the DC canon, has always thrived on bold interpretations of the character. There's something in the essence, and it speaks to what I was talking about with the TV show. There's something in the primal qualities of character that thrives on reinterpretation and so forth. And that was a great relief to us. It was sort of, we weren't being told, okay, this is exactly what you have to do. We were being challenged to come up with our own interpretation and try and have a turn at bat with the character.
Yeah, it was interesting too because this is the first Batman movie. Batman Begins was after 9/11, and so there was different things going on in the world, and these movies were very different, obviously, than any Batman we've seen in terms of ideology of the villains and all sorts of things that took on new meaning, I think.
Well, I think any really engaged and sincere group of I suppose creative people, you try and reflect the world you live in. You try and do that with a certain amount of I suppose sincerity. We were always going for a heightened reality, not direct realism, if you like, because the character is very operatic. You're selling a very larger than life concept. But when you look back on the films and the world in which they were created, I like to think that you do find resonances. We tried to never be overtly political or self-conscious about the relationship with what was going on in the world and what we were reflecting in the films. But at the same time, if you're really doing your job right, and you're really laying yourself open to what are your fears, what are the things you're most worried about in the world you're living in, hopefully there will be some resonance. And I think that's the function of fiction, and particularly this type of very sort of heightened cinema, is to give us a kind of a way of dealing with the world around us that's entertaining, but can also be thought-provoking.
In Batman Begins, it was really one of we know there's a million origin story movies now, but that was at the beginning of origin stories really becoming more popular here. And so that was a different way to go at that point.
It was. I mean, the fascinating thing is when we looked at the history of, for example, what Tim Burton had done so brilliantly with the character earlier, looking back at the television series, looking in the comics themselves, the great history of all the great writers and artists who've worked on it, there wasn't really a definitive telling of the origin story. There were various kind of ways of looking at that, but there was an interesting sort of gap, certainly in the movies, there was an interesting gap for us to come in and try and bring something new to. And I always very much had in mind what Dick Donner had done with Superman in the late 70s. I'd seen that film when I was 8 years old, and it made quite an impression. And it was about the gravity with which that film allowed you to believe, you believe a man could fly. I mean, it did that. It took you on that journey so that it made it all possible. And that was very exciting. And one of the ways it did that was the incredible casting of that film, from Christopher Reeve, obviously, but Marlon Brando, all these incredible supporting players. Gene Hackman, I mean, Ned Beatty, I mean, there's so many. We tried to put together that kind of cast for Batman Begins, just to give it that weight of event cinema, and not let it be dismissed as what at the time would have felt as a dismissal, which is a comic book movie. We didn't want it viewed as that. Of course, now comic book movies are a very different thing, and they're the biggest films being made now. So the world's changed in that regard. But what we wanted to do was really try and tell something with, I suppose, a sense of weight, a sense of gravity to it.
When you sat down with David and then Jonah, did you always know this was going to be a trilogy, or were you doing a standalone movie when you did Batman Begins?
Well, the answer's a little complicated. I think when I sat down with David first off, we very loosely started talking about, where you would get to in the first film, or as you look at which villain you want to take on for Batman Begins, that kind of thing. There was a bit of loose talk about, if you had the opportunity to do more, you'd do a trilogy, and this is how it would lay out. But almost out of a sense of superstition, very rapidly put that to one side. When those films were being made, it was very much the case of, you had to make a great movie, or you weren't going to get the opportunity to make a sequel. I mean, there was no studio at the time really interested in investing in multiple films until you'd proven the concept. So we put everything we could into Batman Begins and tabled everything else for later. So the Joker card at the end of Batman Begins was never intended as a sort of direct, reference to a sequel. It was very much about sending the audience out of the theatre with a sense of the possibilities and excitement for, okay, this is the completion of the origin story, and now the character's going to, go off into this world we've created. So when we came to do The Dark Knight, we took a similar approach. We didn't save anything or hold anything back for Dark Knight Rises. We just put everything into The Dark Knight, with just a very loose idea at the back of our thinking of how you would finish a trilogy.
You had something that doesn't really exist much anymore, as I observe the way films are being done, and certainly big films, the luxury of time to do this over the course of several years, which is great, and really probably informs what you did too, having that period of time between each film.
Yeah, very much. I mean, I think we were very fortunate to have really what was the traditional period of time between sequels and so forth. We took 3 years between the first two films, 4 years between the second and third. That allows you to grow with the characterization, with the world. It's not that you're necessarily reactive to the way the audience has received the film, but you're sort of going through a process with the audience. You're living with these stories for a little bit longer, and you're taking a little more time over it, and it lets you put more into, it lets you grow with it and put more things into it, and sort of put things in it you never knew were going to be there. You change over the years. I mean, we were working on these films for about, almost 10 years, and you change as a filmmaker, you change as a creator, you change as a person. You go through different things in your life, whatever the films come out, and I think there's a richness to the films that I'm very pleased with that I know that I couldn't have put in if we'd had to do, one a year or something like that.
And each one, even though it's in the overall kind of comic book movie superhero genre, each one is really a different genre unto itself.
Yeah, definitely. We never saw them as fitting into we saw them as loosely speaking just fitting into the action film genre, not specifically the comic book genre. And the first film we viewed very much as an origin story, as a hero's journey. The second film, we wanted to very much change the genre. And the reason is, when you come to do a sequel to a large-scale film, you risk just bloating things. You risk going bigger without any sense of purpose. But shifting the genre to really a crime story. I was thinking very much of the films of Michael Mann, for example. He is a huge influence on The Dark Knight, huge influence. Yeah. And that lets you create a step up from the film you made before without it feeling like it's for the sake of it. It's a demand of the genre. And then in Dark Knight Rises, which I know you guys are about to watch, that then became almost, we were aiming for sort of a war film or a historical epic. That was the sort of genre of that one. And the film very much represents an attempt to sort of fuse the tones of the first two films, because the first film is quite romanticized, it's a very classical kind of hero's journey. The second film is quite cold and efficient and I suppose bombastic in a way, and we wanted to try and fuse both those things with the third. The shifts in genre, they also inform your choice of villain. So, taking Ra's al Ghul, Scarecrow, yes, but also Ra's al Ghul as a mentor, turned enemy, fit the hero's journey very much. And the Joker seems the perfect, chaotic, anarchistic sort of presence for a crime story in which Gotham becomes the sort of playground, these two adversaries facing off. And then Bane is a much more militarized kind of, as I say, almost has the feel of sort of historical epic or something. He's very much a physical protagonist and a military protagonist.
That's so interesting. So the villains kind of led the way unusually here. Even though it's Batman, it's Bruce Wayne, it's all of that. It's the duality of his characters, but these villains are very particular.
They are, but you're choosing, bear in mind, you're choosing the villain relative to if you like, the stage in Bruce Wayne's story that you're trying to get across. And so it all really starts from Bruce Wayne, and as a trilogy, it's about the arc of that character and how he starts and where he winds up. And that in itself, the fact that the trilogy and our version of Bruce Wayne's story has a beginning, middle, and end, is itself an interpretation. It's not something that every Batman fan would want to see necessarily, an ending to that story. For some people that violates some of the tenets of it. But that's the thing about taking on a beloved character like this. You really have to be sincere in your intentions, and just, hopefully the audience goes with you if they can tell that you're really just trying to tell the best story that you can.
Yeah. Well, you had Christian Bale in all three, and that was a big plus. Was he in your mind right from the beginning, or were you looking at others that you want to share with us right now?
Well, it's an easy answer actually, because we did do screen tests, but Christian was actually the first actor I met for the role. And so I think I had a pretty strong sense from there. But interestingly, particularly for people who've just seen the first two films, Cillian Murphy was somebody who I had seen in Danny Boyle's film, 28 Days Later, and he screen tested for Batman actually, and gave an extraordinary test, and so we wound up casting him as Scarecrow based on that.
Oh, that's interesting. Wow. Well, you had such a great cast. You alluded to it earlier, but the level of actors that you had from, oh my gosh, Michael Caine and Liam Neeson and on and on and on down the line.
Yeah, Morgan Freeman.
Was, you don't always think of it when you see in this genre, that level of casting.
Yeah.
And it's very important.
It was pretty exciting when we were temp mixing, which is, the first time you put the film up, you take it to a dub stage, which is where you mix all your sound and you bring the music and everything. And it's always interesting because the mixers haven't seen the film before. The sound editors have, but they bring all the sounds in, so the mixers kind of go through each reel. So it's a little bit looking, where they're getting to. And I remember the British mixers, we were doing it over in England, and Morgan Freeman turned around and the mixers were just like, how many other movie stars do you have in this movie? So I think it's about the last appearance of one, but yeah, it was fun. Really it was about that wanting to give a sense of, as I say, gravity to things. We wanted to signal with the casting that we were very serious about this, and that this film really, really mattered to us. And at the time, there wasn't, other than Donna's film, there really wasn't much precedent for it, so it took a bit of convincing. Some of these guys took a bit of convincing. But once they turned up, I mean, they were just a pleasure to work with, you know, Gary Oldman and Morgan Freeman and Michael, I mean, just extraordinary professionals.
Aaron Eckhart was so cool.
Yeah.
So, and, you know, everybody, you know, down the line, you gave them real chance to act too, which doesn't always happen.
You know, we found a way. I mean, a lot of it was the relationship I had with the crew, like my director of photography, Wally Pfister, Nathan Crowley, the production designer. I mean, we found ways. We'd all done smaller films together, and we found ways to try and create a little space for the actors there, that we could pay a little more attention to the drama, you know, not lose that in the fireworks and in the grand scale things. And so one of the things I very much have enjoyed about working at this scale is there is an alternation, there's a shift between large scale action, you know, car chases, flipping trucks, that kind of thing, and then you get to spend a week, you know, just with actors exploring the characters and you know, sitting there talking, and that shift is that variety is a really fun thing. I think it's a fun thing for the audience watching it. It's also a fun thing for us in making it, so you're getting to do a little bit of everything.
Did you do a lot of research in terms of films? Because I know you're a real movie nerd too, and you probably know it off the top of your head, but did you watch a lot of other films, action films in particular, and looking at some of those sequences and wondering what you might do here?
I mean, when we did, going into Batman Begins, which was by far the biggest film I had done at the time, I relentlessly analyzed every action film ever made and all the James Bond films and all the rest of timing, you know, how long is a car chase? Well, it's 4 minutes long. Surprisingly, you'd think it was 9 minutes, but it's 4 minutes. Yeah.
All of it seems like it was 15 minutes or something.
They're all a little shorter than you expect. Some of them, if there's an added component like a car that turns into a submarine, you get into the 7-minute range. But surprisingly short. And it's, you know, I felt, you know, going into this with as little experience as I had. My experience was with watching films. My experience was as an audience member and as a film fan, and trying to tap into what was that experience. And so I did go through a process and put my collaborators through a process of looking at other films and how they had affected us. And okay, well, what are the numbers on that? You know, Dick Donner's Superman. What minute does Christopher Reeve put the costume on? Things like that. You know? And, yeah, well, you know, it felt well. It was partly because the studio was always a bit nervous about okay, Batman doesn't turn up for almost an hour. So I said, well, I was able to say, well, Christopher Reeve didn't put on the suit until 53 minutes. That statistic is not true, but that's what I told him.
Kind of like Rain Man. Well, I know it was 53 minutes there. So.
No, I know I said it was 53 minutes. Well, they cheat a little bit because you get a little shot of them in the Fortress of Souls. You just fly them out, and then you got to wait a bit longer.
Although you started on films that might be considered smaller, more indie following, I'm thinking of, and Memento. You're known for much bigger scale now. I mean, your last few films are definitely in the big scale, which I think you are very comfortable doing. You like doing this kind of thing. We're here in IMAX seeing this. And by the way, I was told that this sold out within 5 minutes.
Very grateful for everybody for coming, particularly because this screen and this format is my favorite way of watching films. Is the way they were shot. Batman Begins was transferred via a DMR process, which was my first sort of entering into a relationship with the IMAX folks. I'd wanted to do a film, shooting a film on IMAX for a long time, since I was about 16, and I'd been to museums, like the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, where the screen documentary is shot in this format. So Batman Begins was sort of a test run of getting to know those guys and what they could do with blowing up 35mm material. But on The Dark Knight, for the first time, as a Hollywood production, we borrowed their cameras, did a bunch of tests, and then went in and shot, you know, our largest action set pieces on this format. So the print you saw today was an original negative print, you know, shot with their cameras, really formatted for this giant screen. And so it's a really special way to be able to see the films, and one that, you know, you keep trying to use or keep using. We had it on Dunkirk. I mean, Dark Knight Rises, which you'll see, we shot even more on IMAX.
Yeah.
Interstellar, we shot even more on IMAX, and by the time we got to Dunkirk, we basically shot the whole film large format. So this is really my favorite way of seeing the films.
You are famously a big proponent of film. You
Yeah.
shoot on film, you edit on film. What is the difference when you see it finally made for you? You know what you're doing with it. So.
Well, the difference is it's the analog representation of color and grayscale and so forth, and the sharpness of this format is unparalleled. I mean, IMAX film is the highest quality imaging format that's ever been invented. Weirdly, it was invented, the year before I was born, 1969, but it still nothing else has really come close. What we try to do, what we've done on all our films, is to minimize any digitization, scanning it and recording it out. So we shoot the film, we take the negatives that ran through the camera. When we finish editing, we cut them together, we literally glue them together, splice them together, and then we print the film from that. So if you're seeing one of my films at Citywalk here, for example, it'll be an original negative print, and it'll be printed right off the film that actually ran through the camera. And the enhanced quality of that is, it's a pretty magical thing.
The quality, and I was in Cannes when you revealed the 2001 sort of, I don't know when I'd call it a restoration, because it was really going back to...
We call it unrestored.
Unrestored.
Unrestoration.
That Warner Brothers helped you with in
Yeah.
doing that, and I saw it, and I've never seen 2001 like that.
Yeah.
It was a whole different experience for me, and better.
It's pretty cool. I mean, we've gone through an intense period of innovation in the digital realm, and it's transformed distribution, it's transformed movies in a lot of ways, mostly good. But we're now in a period where, as particularly looking at film history, it's important that we go back and we look at, okay, how were these films originally intended to be shown? How were they meant to be seen? And so the screenings we're doing of the Dark Knight Trilogy, for example, they're being shown exactly how I had intended them to be shown. With our unrestoration of 2001, we just went back to the original negative. We made prints based on the original timing notes from the MGM labs who'd handled it at the time. Didn't interpret anything, change anything, we just put them out exactly as they would have been seen at the time, which was a little different to how most people had seen it.
Yeah, exactly. It's we've talked about this before, but there's nothing to compare seeing something in a theater on a big screen. And I know technology allows all of it, and there's lots of talk about that, but there's just nothing that compares with that. We can't lose that, so we have to keep emphasizing.
No, it's very important. The size of the screen is one thing. The size of the audience is another thing. People coming together with a shared, hopefully, enthusiasm for something, but also that unknown. You don't know how the audience is going to react to a new film, and everybody's there with a great sense of anticipation. There's that, and then there's the technical side. Preserving analog presentation of film for films that were made that way or intended to be seen that way. It all adds up to the same thing, which is a respect for the creators of the past and opportunities for the filmmakers of the future, so that they get to make films however they want, whether it's using older methods. That's what I've availed myself of, is methods that were, some of the methods we've used on the last few films were really on the way out. I mean, in the film you've just seen, there's a moment that always tickles me where the Batmobile smashes head on into a garbage truck, and it's a miniature. And every time I see it, I mean, I don't think anyone's ever noticed it's a miniature. It's beautifully done, beautifully shot. Those were methodologies that were on the way out, really had already fallen by the wayside by the time we made that film. So for the filmmakers of the future, you want to keep all of these different ways of expressing ourselves alive to see what they would do.
Yeah. I also love it, as you watch it, it's unique here to be able to see all three films back to back in as good a presentation as you could possibly see.
Yeah.
What's your opinion? Have you watched them all three in a row like this diehard group is doing today?
No, on a serious note, myself and Nathan Crowley is the production designer of the film, and he's the first to the creative partner after the writers. So we went down to IMAX and we screened, when we were going to do Dark Knight Rises, we screened Batman Begins and The Dark Knight one after the other, to then talk about the tone of how we're going to approach the third one. So that's the most I've watched sort of in one day. I've seen the films plenty.
But they have seen it differently than you have.
They have, yeah. No, they have. I mean, maybe one day I'll convince my kids to do that with me or something.
It leads to, I know we only have a couple of minutes before you're going to see number 3, but it leads to the natural question, which I know the answer to, I'm pretty sure, but you're done with Batman, right?
I think it's more than Batman's done with me. I think, we had 10 years of just the most tremendous privilege of working with this beloved character, who I'm told turns 80 literally today.
Yeah,
Happy birthday.
Today's,
No, we feel very privileged to have been able to be the sort of custodians of the character for our 9-year run, and it was all-consuming and fantastic. But it was time to pass it on to other people and see what they do with it. And I'm excited for the future of the character. He's a character who will never die, never go away, never wither. I mean, generations hence are going to reinterpret this character, I think, in all kinds of ways. I'll be excited to see that.
And it's extraordinary too on a couple of fronts too, because Heath Ledger is still the only person in this overall genre ever to win an Oscar, for acting, which is a real achievement too, a breakthrough. And Dark Knight still is responsible. We all talk in the awards business here. It's responsible for the Academy changing their rules and going to 10 films when it didn't get a Best Picture nomination, which everybody thought it deserved and was expecting. And they changed their rules to make sure that didn't happen again. And,
Yeah, which is a kind of cool consolation prize, I guess.
We got plenty of nominations, and of course, Dunkirk, your most recent film, was nominated for numerous Academy Awards, and you and directing and producing and all of those categories. So it's amazing. Can't wait to see your next film. We're only seeing it dribble out a little bit here and there, little casting announcements. I'm not going to ask you anything about it, but I can't wait to see that film and see what you do next. And they are going to see The Dark Knight Rises now, so